Hello. Today we're going to talk about if versus ifs. It's not the easiest thing to say because I'm just putting an S on the end of the word. And so when I talk about that, I'm talking about Excel, and I'm talking about these functions. These all fall into the category of your very common functions like average, sum, count, but they've got an if on the end of them. So they are used for finding mathematical values of a range of data meeting some criteria. So now that I've kind of put that out there, let's talk about what they're for. So here is a workbook, and these are the kind of questions which you would answer using the AverageIf, the CountIf. And so the moral of this story, I'm just going to say it once and I'm going to say it a couple more times, is when you have a choice between using an AverageIf and an AverageIfs, or a SumIf and a SumIfs, you should always use the one with the S on the end. There's just no downside to it. There are things that you can do with the S functions that you cannot do with the other function. So, to illustrate that point, let's look at some real examples. So I've got some golf data here. In this particular cell, I want to count the number of players that are from Korea. And so must use formula. Of course, I could just eyeball this and go 1, 2, 3. But since we're using a formula, let's do that. So this is a count if, right? I want to count based on this column, but that is also based on a certain criteria. So I've got two ways I can do this. I can I can go to formulas, and it's under more functions, which is kind of strange, statistical. So here we are, we've got CountIf, and we've got CountIfs. If is for a single criteria, ifs is for multiple criteria. I advocate for just using the S-class functions every time. This problem here could be solved with this function, but I'm going to go this route and show you that it works. So here's the dialog box, so criteria range, that means what column do you want to look at. I want to look at the country column, and I am looking for Korea. So I can either type Korea or I can just point at a cell with Korea. And notice since it's the S class function, I get more criteria, and I just can use those or not. So if there's one criteria, fine, this function works just fine. Now for this one, I could have used either function. For this second field, so this is in cell M3, count the number of players that are from the USA and shot less than 69. So there are two criteria, right? So I'm looking at the country, and I am also looking at round one. When there are multiple criteria, that's when you have no choice but to use the functions with the S on the end of them. So note there are some places where you have to use the S functions, and there are some where you can get away without them, but the S functions are always good, so I advocate for always using the S functions. So let's do this one. Some more functions, statistical, CountIfs. I don't have a choice here. So for criteria 1, I'm going to look at country, and I'm going to point to a cell with USA. For criteria 2, I'm going to look at round 1. It's criteria range, and my criteria is less than 69. And I press OK, and I get something like that. So in a situation where you've got multiple criteria, you don't have a choice. If there's only one criteria, you do have a choice. And since the other function ends up being the more useful one, you should probably use the more useful one all the time. Now the one question or concern is, so a lot of people are learning Excel, learning these functions to pass the MOS exam. In the event that you were taking the MOS exam, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that maybe you'd be forced into using the other one. But if you have a choice in the real world, you should always use the functions that have the S on them. So AverageIf. So this is a average total score for players that are from the USA, and so I don't have a choice here. This is an AverageIf. Now this is not going to work here because there are two criteria. We're looking at both the round and the country. So let's select AverageIfs, and I'm not really trying to teach you about this right now. This is a little bit more difficult than the other dialog box. So the average range is total score. Criteria range, notice those labels, are country. I'm looking in that range, I'm looking for USA, and my other criteria is round 1, and I'm looking for less than 69. I'm going to make another video about details of how to put this together, so I'm not really talking about that. But in this video, I wanted to make clear the idea that you should always use the S-class functions if you have a choice. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle.